April 30th, 1945. In a concrete bunker beneath the ruins of Berlin, Adolf Hitler takes his own life. The Third Reich collapses. But above ground and far from the crumbling capital, a message is transmitted in code, precise, emotionless. Doenitz shall be my successor. In the waning hours of Nazi Germany, power is passed not to a general, not to a party official, but to a naval officer, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz. How did a career submariner, a man more at home in torpedo rooms and sonar stations than in political councils, become the last head of state of Hitler's Germany? Who was Karl Dönitz before the war? And what role did he play in one of the deadliest naval campaigns in modern history? His name rarely appears in headlines or popular films, yet his influence during World War II was immense. He commanded the U-boat armada that brought Britain to the edge of starvation, masterminded the infamous wolfpack tactics, and briefly led what remained of the Reich in its final days. But his legacy is tangled between innovation and obedience, between military precision and moral ambiguity. Karl Dönitz was born on September 16, 1891, in Grunau near Berlin, the son of an engineer. He joined the Imperial German Navy in 1910, entering a world of rigid discipline, polished brass, and oceanic horizons. By the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, Dönitz was already serving aboard warships in the Mediterranean. It was there, in 1916, that his fate turned beneath the waves. His surface ship, the Breslau, was reassigned to the Ottoman theater. Later that year, Dönitz volunteered for the relatively new and dangerous submarine service, a posting considered both prestigious and perilous. It was undersea, amid oil fumes and pressure gauges, that Dönitz found his calling. In October 1918, while commanding U-boat UB-68 in the Mediterranean, his vessel was forced to surface due to mechanical failure and was sunk by British forces. He was captured and spent the final months of the war as a British prisoner of war in Malta. That period, isolated, watching the empire he served dissolve, left a deep impression. According to his post-war writings, Dönitz began to believe that Germany had not been defeated militarily, but collapsed from within. It was a view shared by many in the military and would later shape the myth of the stab in the back that permeated the interwar years. After returning to Germany, Dönitz remained in the Navy, now stripped of battleships and prestige under the Treaty of Versailles. But he climbed steadily through the ranks of the modest Kriegsmarine, focusing on discipline, organization, and innovation. Quiet, methodical, and respected by superiors, he did not stand out politically, but he was known for his loyalty and technical clarity. During the 1920s and early 1930s, Dönitz quietly nurtured an idea that submarines, not surface fleets, would dominate the next naval war. Unlike the great battleships of the past, submarines were invisible, hard to track, and deadly. He envisioned Rudeltaktik, wolfpack tactics, in which multiple submarines would coordinate attacks on convoys, overwhelming even heavily escorted merchant ships. This doctrine was not merely tactical. Dönitz saw submarines as a weapon of national survival. He believed Britain could be strangled not with bombs or armies, but by denying it food and fuel at sea. It was a strategy born from the memory of Germany's own collapse in 1918, and from the cold precision of a man who spent years listening for enemy propellers through hydrophones. By 1935, with Hitler's rise and the expansion of the Kriegsmarine, Dönitz was appointed to rebuild the U-boat force. He did so with rigor. Crews were trained in extreme secrecy and under harsh conditions. The vessels were small, cramped, and technologically limited, but under Dönitz's command, they became a fearsome force. In these early years, he also developed a reputation for loyalty, not to ideology, but to command. Dönitz was no political agitator, but neither did he resist the Nazi leadership. He believed in order, chain of command, and the absolute duty of a soldier to obey. That belief would come to define and haunt his career. When World War II broke out in September 1939, Karl Dönitz held the rank of Commodore and commanded Germany's U-boat fleet. It was a modest force, just over 50 submarines, many of them small and limited in range. But Dönitz was prepared. He had spent years training crews, refining tactics, and preparing for a confrontation he believed would be fought, and won, on the ocean's surface and beneath it. The first months of the war proved his instincts correct. Allied merchant shipping was vulnerable, scattered, and lightly defended. Dönitz's Rudel tactic, or wolfpack doctrine, involved multiple U-boats converging on a convoy and attacking in coordinated waves, often at night. The results were devastating. In 1940 alone, over 1,000 Allied ships were sunk, and the British supply lines strained under the loss of food, fuel, and weapons. Dönitz viewed the campaign not as a series of independent sinkings, but as a grand strategic chess match. He used decrypted Allied communications, aerial reconnaissance, and aggressive patrols to anticipate convoy routes. U-boats became Germany's most feared naval weapon, earning the nickname Grey Wolves of the Atlantic. Despite the early successes, Dönitz faced limitations. Germany could not build submarines fast enough, and many of the early models had limited endurance. He continually pressured the naval high command for more resources, but battleships and prestige projects like the Bismarck often received priority. Still, he remained focused, refining both the tactics and the training. By 1942, U-boats were operating off the American coast with deadly efficiency in what the Germans called the second happy time. Dozens of tankers and cargo ships were sunk within sight of shorelines, their explosions lighting up the night. Dönitz saw this as confirmation that his strategy could win the war, not with dramatic land battles, but with slow, systemic strangulation. Yet the tide began to turn. Allied advances in radar, sonar, and aerial patrols slowly eroded the U-boat's advantage. The breaking of the Enigma code, which Dönitz had considered uncrackable, allowed British and American forces to anticipate movements and reroute convoys. In 1943, U-boat losses spiked dramatically, over 40 in a single month. Dönitz, now a Grand Admiral, was faced with an uncomfortable truth. The Atlantic was no longer theirs. He began developing new submarine models, faster, quieter, with greater range, but production delays and Allied bombing campaigns made large-scale deployment impossible. Still, even in decline, Dönitz's command style remained firm. He believed in duty and resolve, and in the submarine arm's unique capacity to change the war's course. His orders remained precise, his tone stoic. For many U-boat crews, his voice on the radio was the final human sound they would ever hear. By 1944, the U-boat campaign had lost strategic effectiveness, but its legacy was already vast. Over 2,700 Allied ships sunk, tens of thousands of sailors lost, and entire naval doctrines rewritten. By early 1945, the German Reich was collapsing on all fronts. The Soviet army pressed in from the east, the Western Allies crossed the Rhine, and Berlin braced for encirclement. Hitler, increasingly isolated and distrustful of the military leadership, dismissed Göring and Himmler, accusing them of betrayal. In a final act of strategic fatalism, he turned to the man he believed had remained loyal, effective, and apolitical, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler took his life in the Führer bunker. In his testament, he named Dönitz as Reichspräsident, bypassing the Nazi party hierarchy. The news reached Dönitz at his command post in Flensburg near the Danish border. There, amid ruins and disarray, he formed the so-called Flensburg government, a last brief administrative structure for a regime already dead in spirit. Dönitz's goals were limited but clear: to avoid further bloodshed, maintain order among the retreating German forces, and negotiate the surrender on terms that would protect civilians and preserve some continuity for the German people. He was under no illusions. The war was lost, but he hoped to secure the West while stalling the East. On May 7, 1945, Dönitz authorized General Jodl to sign the unconditional surrender in Reims. A day later, a second signing took place in Berlin under Soviet supervision. World War II in Europe was officially over. Dönitz's role during these days was pragmatic, procedural, and devoid of rhetoric. He remained focused on military order, not ideology. His government lasted only 23 days until May 23rd, when Allied forces dissolved it and arrested him and his cabinet. At the Nuremberg trials, Dönitz stood among the top surviving leaders of the Third Reich. He was charged with crimes against peace and war crimes related to unrestricted submarine warfare. Notably, Admiral Chester Nimitz of the U.S. Navy testified that the United States had used similar tactics. Still, the tribunal found Doenitz guilty and sentenced him to 10 years in prison. He served his sentence in Spandau prison, sharing confinement with other convicted officials. Upon release in 1956, Doenitz retired to a quiet life in Omühle, publishing his memoirs and granting only limited interviews. He remained unapologetic about his actions, but distanced himself from Nazi ideology. Karl Dönitz died on December 24, 1980, aged 89. His funeral was attended by veterans of the Kriegsmarine, many of whom still saw him as a professional officer who had served his country with discipline and resolve.